you want to sit now or should we start?
Ja, schönen guten Abend. Ich heiße Sara Parkin und bin die Geschäftsführerin der Petra Kelly Stiftung. And now I think I switched to English because a lot of you don't speak German as I was told. So, my name is Sara Parkin, I'm from the... The Petra Kelly Foundation is a Bavarian educational institution, and we are close to the Greens, belonging to the greater area of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And it is our job to offer events within the framework of political education. We are not Petra Kelly's heirs. We do not administer her estate, and we do not have any rights whatsoever on her images or her texts. A lot of people think that we do exactly that, but we don't. So, but unlike our sister foundations in the foundation network of the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, we are not called Heinrich Böll. Most of them are called Heinrich Böll Stiftung Baden-Württemberg or Heinrich Böll Stiftung Hessen or whatever. We are not. We were named after Petra Kelly, who had been dead for 5 years at the time when we were founded in 1996, shot by her partner, Gerd Bastian. She came from Bavaria. She was born in Bavaria. Later, she moved with her family to the US, but Bavaria was her home base. Her grandmother, who she loved very much, lived in Nuremberg. She stayed with her a lot. And this is the place where she ran for the Bundestag, and this year she would have been 75 years old. Petra, she was a politician, but more of an activist, a driven person. She was and is a symbol of the worldwide ecological and pacifist movement committed to democratic development and the promotion of human rights. And she was the co-founder of the Green Party in Germany, and she was a member of parliament. I have to change. The Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society dedicates a conference to Petra Kelly under the title, I have to read it, Petra Kelly at 75, Histories, Legacies and Contemporary Meanings of Transitional Ecological Politics. And some of the participants of this conference are here tonight, I think, and a very warm welcome from me. Tonight we are showing the film Die Unbeugsamen, in English it would be The Unbowed, which tells the story of the women in the Bonner Republic who literally had to fight for their participation in the democratic decision-making process against men obsessed with success like real pioneers, and Petra Kelly was one of these women. But the film is preceded by a conversation with Sara Parkin, who started a career as a nurse, I read in Wikipedia, I think, in Edinburgh, but rose to prominence as a green political activist during and after the 1989 European Parliament election. And Ms. Parker is the author of the biography The Life and Death of Petra Kelly, which never was published in German, I think. We have it in English, and someone told me he just reads it in Spanish, but it's not published in German.
You read it in Dutch and in
Dutch.
Korean as well.
Okay, but not in German.
Not in German.
Ms. Parkin will discuss environmental activism then and now and Petra Kelly's political legacy with Yannick Kiefl from Fridays for Future in Munich, and the moderation is gratefully taken over by Dr. Stephen Milder from RCC. Thank you to everyone involved. And now I wish you and me an interesting evening, hopefully with new insights. Thank you for your interest and for coming tonight. And now the microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and yeah, thank you. I want to join with Tiedemann in welcoming you all tonight, and thanking you for coming to this discussion that will be titled Petra Kelly at 75, Her Legacy and Its Meaning Today. For Andreas Junge, who is here somewhere, and I don't know where he went. There he is, way in the back. And I've been organizing an academic conference on Petra Kelly's life and legacy, which, as Gabriel just mentioned, is going to take place at the Rachel Carson Center over the next couple of days. This event this evening, which I think is going to be a wonderful conversation, is also sort of a kickoff event, a keynote event for that conference. And it's been a real pleasure and a special opportunity to get to work together with the Petra Kelly Stiftung on organizing this event and to be able to have it somewhere and in a way that will invite a broader conversation than, well, just we might have at the university. We're very fortunate that we have two really wonderful speakers tonight. Gil already said some things about them, so I will try to keep this very brief, but I want to begin just by saying something about them. Our first speaker will be Sara Parkin, and when Andreas and I began planning this conference, which we realized earlier today was basically about 2 years ago that we first, or Andreas actually first had the idea for it, she was one of the very first people we thought of that it would be wonderful to have here. Both of us have read her book, The Life and Death of Petra Kelly, that was already mentioned, and it's a really important book in addition to all of the other work that Sara Parkin has done. I mentioned just a couple of things. She's a principal associate of the Sustainability Literacy Project, chair of Population Matters. She contributes to other organizations. She's campaigned for sustainable development since the 1960s. She's played leading roles in the UK Green Party and helped found the European Greens, though she no longer has a political affiliation. And it's in that work that she got to know Petra Kelly, that they worked together over the years. And that's, I think, a big part of what makes her book so special about Petra Kelly, because not only did they know each other personally, but Sara Parkin also did a great deal of research to write the book. And really, it has a different perspective than much of what's been written on Petra Kelly. For one thing, because they knew each other, but also because Sara Parkin saw Petra Kelly from outside of the German political context in a way that, as we're going to discuss at the conference over the next couple of days, she was seen, by people all over the world, all over Europe, but somehow differently than how she was seen within Germany. And I think that that perspective really makes her book something special and important. And as Sara Parkin puts it, it helps us to understand Kelly as a true internationalist. Tonight, what Sara Parkin is going to talk about is what it was like for her and Petra Kelly as activists, but also sort of what remains of that work and what the future might hold based on that work, and that links with the book that she's working on now, that's forthcoming, What Does Good Look Like? An Antidote to Anxiety. And that's going to be the opening to a discussion together with Yannick Kiefl, our second speaker, who I'll also briefly introduce before then turning the floor over to the two of them. I have too many pages here where I've done different things. Yannick Kiefl is an activist here in Munich. He's worked for several years with Fridays for Future, but also with other groups like Ende Gelände and Extinction Rebellion and the Grüne Jugend. He's going to talk to us about his own experiences as an activist, as a climate activist, in a way that I think will really relate to what Sara Parkin is going to tell us about her experiences and how she sees those mattering in the present. And based on what the two of them have to say, I think we're going to have a good chance to talk in a broader discussion, including all of you, about what the future holds for ecological activism, but also what the past and our memories of things that have happened in the past in environmental movement and green politics can tell us, can bring us in our understanding of ecological activism now and in the future of it. So I will turn the microphone first to Sara Parkin, who will talk for about 15 minutes, and then Yannick Kiefl will have a chance. Afterwards, I have one or two questions for them to try to open up a conversation, but we'll also welcome questions from all of you as well. And as you know, that's going to end in about an hour at 8:15, and then we will show the movie, as Tiedemann already said. So now I will give the microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to Stephen for inviting me and to the Petra Kelly Foundation. I'm so grateful for them for actually paying the bills that's made it possible for me to be here. I'm really delighted and I'm extremely relieved that Petra and her thinking has been brought forward as we start to consider what has to happen in the next 50 years. And I'll talk more on this in a moment, and I look forward to even more discussions in the conference. And I'm very honoured to be sharing this, standing on something, to be sharing this evening with Yannick. I think to begin with though, I think I have to offer an apology on behalf of my generation. Because once upon a time, when I started in all of this, I was your age, and we were the rebelling, forward-looking, different generation. And we have to apologise because in the last 50 years, on our watch, we were campaigning away, but all the major indicators have been getting worse. And we have to be self-critical. We have to ask the question, why, despite 50 years of hard campaigning, have we got what was called in 1972 the three sort of really serious things that were going wrong. Population, it's doubled in the last 50 years. And there was big conversations in those days, and I even signed a pledge to have no more than 2 children in 1972. Resources, our consumption as individuals, and there's twice as many of us, each individual, each year. In 50 years ago, about 7 tonnes per person per year, it's now 12. And as a consequence of that inevitable consequence of more people consuming more stuff, pollution has gone through the roof. We now know that the forever chemicals, these are chemicals that are not biodegraded by nature, are now found in the breast milk of women and of animals. That's one example at one end. And we also know that pollution is so extensive that our species has changed the climate regulation system in an extremely dangerous way. Why there is not sort of existential crisis management going on in governments, I really do not know. And we started all those years ago with the goal of getting our green ideas into power. And that's what the Green Movement wanted to do. And we failed. And we owe it to you, Yannick, and your generation. We owe it to you to understand why. And I can feel Petra at my side, not only in that apology to you, but to share with you some of the top learnings from our past 50 years, from our experience. And I'm writing about them now from the perspective of 2022, with that sort of hindsight. But Petra was writing and talking about all of this 30 years ago. So we have to remember we've been very prominently talking about it for a long time. Now I'm going to talk about one of the few examples of really important learning to bring forward from our experience. And I'll do it with reference to Petra. She understood the connectedness, the interconnectedness of all life at the chemical level, genetic level of the human species in the ecosystems. And she understood the interconnectedness between nature and the social and the economic systems of our strategies that we'd adopted as a species to go through life. And we talked a lot about these things and how one of the most important things we had to do was to restructure education and political policy making so that it was based on understanding those interconnectednesses in order to be able to come up with some policy that would take us in a different direction, and not the self-cancelling of all different policy areas that we still have today. We talked about how a green way of life has to lead, if you like, to a reintegration of our species into nature's big project of evolution. And so by thinking what we need to do in education and what we need to do in political literacy, is how we can raise the capabilities of all of us to take that path towards the green goal of re-entering into the evolutionary project of nature, because at the moment we're so out of step that we're in danger of becoming fossils. And we need to do that so that personally and politically and collectively we are leading that sort of right, that sort of path. Petra also got the true radicalness of non-violent strategies for achieving a green way of life. And I use radical in the true sense of the word, which means going to the roots, not to going to extremes. And the green movement uses that radical to mean extreme, and that's used as a weapon against us. But when we say radical, we mean going to the roots of the problem. And for her, breaches of human rights and poverty were due to structural violence that's inherent in the way we currently run our lives. And that she talked about that then, and it's the same now. Now, other people actually call that structural violence unfairness and injustice, but it's built into everything we do. Green politics is really about not this or that issue. It's about how we might live in a way that makes it impossible to be violent to each other or to nature. And so that's her non-violence. It was just not simply, and what she said simply, being anti-nuclear or anti-weapons. It was the violence is inherent in a society that can live with extreme poverty, inequality, injustice, and all of those things. And Petra, like me, was often dismayed about how difficult some of our colleagues found it to do politics like that, setting everything in a logical and persistent pursuit of a green way of life. Now, she wrote a lot, and I just wish she'd lived to write what would have been the book that brought all her writings together to display the logic that's in there. She was absolutely logical in everything she said and done, but I don't think it was joined up enough, and we all in those days weren't joining it up enough. And I think the biggest learning of all is that we Greenies, because we didn't pause, because we didn't think, and because we didn't do that, we failed to come up with a destination narrative about what good would look like. What would a green future be? One of Petra's heroes, Martin Luther King, didn't campaign for this and that reduction in CO2 emissions. We did, and we still do. He had a dream for the end of racism. One goal, many paths. And we have stopped off with our ambitions on places in the path without articulating where the path was leading to. Now, like Mandela with apartheid, and like Zelensky, he's doing this with his goal being a Russian-free Ukraine, they are strongly articulating for a goal, and they are not getting into the details of the many paths that could lead to it, because there are many paths, and if we get the logic right, and if we get the destination clear, then we're giving the opportunity to many people to talk about what the green dream would be like, and how can we help help people make their own path towards it? How can we be more inclusive? How can we stop being so purist? In my day, there were people who were so rude to members of campaigning groups because they were not members of the Green Party. They didn't understand that there are many routes to get to the goal, and we should be working together to make it happen. And I know it's not easy, but because we haven't been able to come up with a destination narrative for green politics, the field is open and it's being colonised by our opponents, who are indeed getting more and more extreme as they lose sight of their goals. So that we have to be very conscious of. Now, there's not much to say. I don't want to go on much longer, but I do want to end with a tip to the new generation of campaigners, because whether someone is a political friend or an opponent, a really good way of understanding them and their positions is to know what the world was like when they were in their 20s. Before Petra and I were 25, 50 years ago, God, 50 years ago, the Vietnam War was really getting going, the Berlin Wall went up, the US President, John Kennedy, his brother Bobby, and Martin Luther King were assassinated. We lived through the Summer of Love, the Cuban Missile Crisis, we discovered Maya Angelou and rock and roll. We did all those things happily together, not the beginning ones, but certainly Maya Angelou and rock and roll. We read the books and we followed the 1972 United Nations First Earth Summit. The script's been written. When you hear people talking about the First Earth Summit, they talk about the 1992 one. But it's not. It was in 1972. And the books, Rachel Carson, 60 years ago, and the other books that were written around that time, they were seminal, and they remain seminal. And I think it's really important we don't forget that. We do not have wheels. A lot of wheels we do not have to reinvent. Petra learnt about the history of Europe in a US university, and that made her an easy and competent internationalist from the very beginning. So she didn't invent it, she was it. And anybody who gets involved in green politics has to know there's no use in having a green Germany or a green Britain. It's got to be all of us. So internationalism is stitched into the job description. Her personal life gave her vulnerabilities and it gave her strengths. And she was, to me, the kindest of political and personal friends. And she was strong. I think it's easy to see Petra as fragile. She didn't always have the best of health, but as a person, she was strong, even in the toughest of times. Now, we had no emails, we had no texting, but we nevertheless forged an extremely strong friendship. And also with, in particular, I want to mention Solange Fernex in France and Frieda Meissner-Blau in Austria. We all, four of us, propped each other up. We were good friends, helped each other when things were going wrong. And so with them, and on behalf of them, all of them dead now, I want to wish you, Yannick, you and your generation very well. And I hope that academia will really think hard about its duties at this time. 50 years in the past, and we failed to make any major turnaround in any of the major negative trends. So what can we learn from Petra? And you're in there, you're studying this. What can we learn from that in order that we can make the next 50 years a success? Thank you. Thank you. You've got one there.
Yeah. Hello everyone, my name is Yannick, and I'm from Fridays for Future. Is anyone here who doesn't know about Fridays for Future? Okay, I've done one trick. So everyone who knows Fridays for Future puts their hand up. Okay, so I see one hand that isn't up. So just to recap, I'm going to tell a little story. So you probably have heard of this little girl, Greta Thunberg, and she striked each Friday in front of the parliament, and eventually the press caught wind of that and wrote about her, and that inspired a lot of people to do that as well, and organize and stage large protests, strike together, and fight for their future. Also during that time, Extinction Rebellion started getting big. Also Ende Gelände, which is a huge climate movement here in Germany, started getting big and influential. And so this time, the beginning of 2019, the end of 2018, was actually really interesting time, because everything started growing. People started noticing that we're actually living in an ecological catastrophe. Our climate is collapsing, and so after this influential time, after this important time, here in Munich, especially in Munich, some groups started growing. For example, Fridays for Future or the Extinction Rebellion, and I started getting involved with Extinction Rebellion. And which was actually really great, because Extinction Rebellion does civil disobedience, and you'll actually learn a lot of stuff, a lot of legal stuff, how to talk with the police or how not to talk with the police. And yeah, so that was really good entry, because a lot of things got explained. Almost every one of us was new. And yeah, so in the beginning of Fridays for Future, there was a rather small group of already activist people here in Munich, and this group started getting bigger. A lot of new people wanted to get involved, also me in the beginning of 2019. And I started getting more curious. I started going to the plenaries of Fridays for Future, and this led to me starting to organize with them as well. And in the end, that's where I've ended up, being with Fridays for Future and the Gelände, Extinction Rebellion, and doing protests, doing civil disobedience, and every one of those different organizations has their place. For example, Fridays for Future focuses on school strikes. Currently not as much on school strikes anymore, because a lot of students don't have time during school. And unfortunately, we've shifted our times from actually striking during school, which would have been, in my opinion, a lot more impactful, to striking after school. We're still calling it strikes, though. So so this picture right here is actually from our biggest protest in Munich. It was from the end of 2019. 20th September. This was actually the Königsplatz, and there were about 60,000 people on the Königsplatz, which is a huge amount of people. The people didn't even fit in the space anymore. All of the streets around the space were completely filled to the brim with people, and it was absolutely fantastic. We were protesting a new law in Germany, or a new package for the climate that was being done by the government. And here comes the sad story, that the influence that we hoped we could achieve with this huge protest like in Germany in total, about 1.4 million people protested, which is almost 2% of the population, which is crazy. Even though we brought this many people to the streets, we still couldn't have a significant influence on this new law, on this new package being created for future, which is really, really depressing. And this kind of frustration is reoccurring in this climate movement, because every time you protest, every time you do a nice protest and say, please, 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 please do something for our future, like everyone just laughs, like, yeah, nice protest, well done, well done. And politicians obviously do some PR stuff, they make some photos with us, say, oh my god, yeah, this is so important, now we're gonna actually do it. But of course they're not gonna do it, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And yeah, so over the time, a lot of activists actually got like burned out because we've put so much time and so much effort in it that our group started getting smaller again, and we've gone through a lot of people over the time. We've had a lot of throughput. A lot of the people actually got more radicalized, and in the same sense as Sarah already said, radicalized in a way of changing the system instead of the small parameters that it offers us. So we were getting more frustrated with the current, with our current possibilities, like, because we're getting told that, okay, we should just vote and we should just engage with the current system and everything will change, because that's how we're being told. But in the end, every one of us found out, no, that's actually not what happens at all. Some politicians just come to your protest, say, oh my god, that's so great, and nothing at all changes. Even if you get 1.4 million people onto the streets in Germany, which is absolutely crazy. So a lot of people just got radicalized even more after being radicalized by the politicians in the first place, because no one's getting radicalized by some even like by already leftist people. They're getting radicalized by the politicians. So if anyone wants to blame anyone for radicalizing young people, it's the politicians. Yeah, so after all, this is the story of a lot of young people who are getting frustrated and going radicalizing themselves even more. Yeah, so I don't have pictures of other protests because we are quite privileged as Fridays for Future here in Germany. The police doesn't even see us as anything radical or anything dangerous. Other protests, for example, get a lot more police repression. I've had trouble with police a few times, had some police violence, yeah, which is not nice, but unfortunately quite usual. Yeah, so this is where it ends, like where we are right now. We have a lot of protests with a lot of frustrated people because, as Sarah already said, like we fought for a long time. We've had burnouts. We've had a high throughput of people who came into the movement, knew, okay, I want to change something. I want to create a better future for myself, for other people, and just realized that it's not possible with the tools that we're given. So this is where I come back to you and say, hey, now we're in the same place, please help us. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks so much to you both for those talks, and I think what we were really hoping to achieve when we set out to have this conversation was some kind of discussion, and that's clearly already started, I think, in the way that you both have talked to each other. I thought maybe I would just ask one or two questions to try to push that even a little bit further along, and then we will give you both obviously some more chances to respond to those, but then see if anyone else has any questions that they'd like to ask. And I guess the thing that that really came to me to ask you both about, that kind of built on what you were both talking about, because it seemed to me Sarah, you talked a lot about how long, for 50 years, you've been working, and it seems like the changes that you want to see haven't happened. And Yannick, you were talking about the same thing over the last few years, over the last 3 years, that these changes are not happening. And so I'm wondering, what can we learn from these experiences? As a historian, I think you mentioned, Sarah, already, the job of academics, hopefully to take something useful from all of this. But I wonder also, just in a far more practical kind of way, and in a, how that would happen beyond academics. And one thing that really brought this question to mind actually came up in the last couple of days here in Germany. You probably saw, Yannick and many of you in the audience saw that Greta Thunberg was yesterday evening on the Maischberger program, and then, in addition to many other things that she was talking about, they asked her, okay, what do you think about keeping the nuclear reactors running in Germany a little bit longer? And she said, well, look, it's better than keeping coal plants running. And immediately, this has been brought into political discussion and used against her and against the Green Movement and all sorts of things. So one of the things that it brought up to me, I don't want to get into what are your respective positions on Greta's statement, but rather, if we think about the 70s and certainly about Petra Kelly's career, one of the issues that motivated her greatly personally and a lot of the people that she organized with was trying to stop nuclear energy. And I wonder what can be learned. And, part of the response that came then from people who are active now, I think there was a statement, for example, on the Fridays for Future blog recently from one of the Fridays activists, Kira Böhnisch, who said, most climate activists are too young to have been involved in earlier anti-nuclear protests. The issue is, they perceive the issue as settled. It's not such an important issue anymore to them, even though they're also against nuclear energy. And I was wondering, what could we take from this, the fact that this topic that mobilized so many people, that was so important, seems to have now be, that movement is almost forgotten. Is it worth trying to pull back out the history of that activism? What can it bring us now? Can that add something to the discussions today? What could we get from it? And I wonder what kind of responses either of you have to that.
I got two key questions out of that, and the first one was the burnout, and that recruitment falls off amongst young people nowadays. Now, this is really important. If you're an activist and you think that it is only by you wrecking your health, your family relationships, your financial situation, in order to campaign for something, if you think only by doing that the campaign will succeed, then you really need to take your ego to a doctor, because it is completely wrong. This is the tyranny, this whole idea that unless you are working flat out, ruining everything around you, then the movement will not succeed. It is not true. Instead of doing that to yourself, you should be recruiting others to join you by giving them a good story about what the outcome can be. And we haven't got that sort of narrative. So people are continually being asked to be against something without any idea about what to be for. And that is the challenge of your generation, because we didn't manage it. To stop campaigning on small bits of it and saying what we're against and demanding other people do something about it, and get frustrated and burnt out when they don't listen. And so I think that is the danger of you doing a repeat of what we did. And your challenge is to change the narrative. So when you use the nuclear as an example, if we have the narrative that we are working along this path, which has got many connections for people to get engaged and join in towards a green future, and we're talking about the sort of things that will be positive about that. People think about green future as being living in mud huts and, you know, and being deprived of everything. There's no joy in the way Greens talk about the future they want. Start having all sorts of sessions with young people, and include the odd academic, and start to develop positive narratives about the destination of all of this campaigning, and get people to join in, instead of burning yourself out demanding change. And the whole nuclear, you have to remember in those days, the big nuclear campaign, we were post-Second World War. And so there was a real nervousness about renewed hostilities of some sort, the arming. We didn't look as though there was going to be any sort of peace dividend. So when the whole situating nuclear weapons in Germany started, no wonder there was a huge campaign against it. This was the very worst thing that could happen. And so if now you're hearing somebody say, well, maybe we're going to have to keep them plugged in a little bit longer, that is just one issue, which, if we were on a path where everything was getting better, we could cope with the odd compromise here and there, as long as we were on the positive trajectory. But we're not. We're on a trajectory where everything's getting worse, so that is adding to things getting worse, not making them better. So it's key to get that trajectory changed, because we can't do everything all at once. We can't switch everything we would want to switch immediately, but we need to get the fundamentals right, and that means a good story, clear pathway, and then we make the individual decisions. Not all of them will go the way we would want, but we can have a better chance of getting more of them right. But because we don't have a narrative, and haven't got a positive story to say about how good it would be to be green, we're still talking about what we're against and demanding other people do something.
Fridays for Future is like, no one cares about the odd nuclear power plant like being left on for a few more months. But in my personal opinion, it does sound a little bit cool, but it's a blackout, for example, to realize, okay, we've actually hit rock bottom with our energy crisis. We need to change stuff. It's gonna sound cool, but a small blackout, if, for example, power plants are not running, is a more gentle, like, nudge that we should actually start building up more renewables than for example, other ecological catastrophes that are going to hit us even worse. So in my opinion, it doesn't matter if we leave like one nuclear power plant on for longer, as long as we start building out the renewables even more. But also on the other hand, the whole argument for saying, okay, we need to build some more power plants is completely, like you just said, is completely horrible, because it's going to set us up for a path towards nuclear again. Because
I didn't say I supported building new power plants.
Sorry.
I agree.
Yeah, because in the end, we need to face that we cannot, like, for the love of everything, we cannot solve our problems by building nuclear power plants, by anything else that is decentralized and people friendly. We need to actually face the problem and deal with it instead of just coping with some new technologies and just building bigger nuclear power plants.
Totally agree.